One of the things that happened, and the thing that I remember most vividly about it, is that we had a company clerk, a little guy named Somerville, a little roly-poly fellow who was a Seventh-day Adventist. He wouldn't work on Saturdays. He was a company clerk. He was a good typist and a very smart little guy. The next thing I knew, I heard Somerville running across the field. When this truck blew up, I could feel a concussion even in the slit trench where I was. Sergeant Morgan, Sergeant Morgan. Morgan is our top sergeant. When this truck blew up, I could feel a concussion even in the slit trench where I was. The next thing I knew, I heard Somerville running across the field yelling, Sergeant Morgan, Sergeant Morgan. Morgan is our top sergeant. And I thought, oh my gosh, poor Somerville's been hit. He says, my file box was hit and there's all the papers are all over everything. And I thought, oh my gosh, poor Somerville's been hit. He says, my file box was hit and there's all the papers are all over everything. Well, the poor guy was so conscientious about keeping the company records, you know. Well, the poor guy was so conscientious about keeping the company records, you know, in his box. His records were gone. They were just all over everything. Later in the day, interestingly enough, these were P-38s that were strafing. Later in the day, interestingly enough, these were P-38s that were strafing. One of my men says to him, he had a broken leg. Later in the day, he had a broken leg, I remember. They started bringing in casualties. One of the casualties was an American aviator. He had a broken leg, I remember. I don't know how he ever survived a crash, but he had been shot down. of my men says to him, "Were you one of these fly boys that was strafing around here today? Were you one of these fly boys that was strafing around here today?" And he says, "Not me, friend, not me." One of the men in my company had been captured by the Germans up near Montburg, I guess it was. They had taken him up north toward Cherbourg. They weren't far off the coast, apparently. There was a battleship offshore. One of the men in my company had been captured by the Germans. They weren't far off the coast, apparently. On occasion, there was a battleship offshore. He was a prisoner of the Germans. They heard this tremendous blast. They heard this tremendous blast. One of the ships offshore had thrown in, it must have been a 16-inch shell. And it demolished a couple of buildings, and it demolished a couple of buildings in the street, and the Germans scattered in every direction, and he took off south and back toward our own lines and managed to get back to where we were.
Alright, I am especially happy to be back streaming for two reasons. The main, most important one being it's a privilege. The content that I'm sampling tonight comes from Dr. John Kirchner, my wife's grandpapa, who was on the front lines during the Normandy retaking of France during World War II of the Allies. And yeah, he recorded his memories of that time. My guess is in the 80s. He recorded it, yeah, on just a cassette tape. Unfortunately, part of the cassette tape was actually accidentally recorded over by someone, but we're going to be hearing tonight what survived. So I'll get right to it. Um, but one thing I want to say right here, and I will maybe mention it again in case someone comes into the stream halfway through. But yeah, this is about war, and war is a bad, evil thing, and so there are some gory moments in Dr. Kirchner's memories. Um, the most graphic one is actually probably going to be coming right up next, I believe. And so, yeah, viewer discretion is strongly advised. So please keep that in mind for war, gore, depictions of gore, I guess is what I would say, descriptions of it. But anyway, get back to the tunes without any further ado.
Not been played. Normal.
Now, that wasn't very often in Normandy. One of the troublesome things that we encountered, a German plane that would fly over our area at night in the dark. They called him Bed Check Charlie. A German plane that would fly over our area at night. Nobody ever shot at it. They called him Bed Check Charlie. Nobody ever shot at it. he was trying to find out our positions, and they just ignored him. But it was a damn nuisance. Every now and then, however, the Germans would come over and drop flares. Every now and then, however, the Germans would come over and drop flares. Now that wasn't very often in Normandy. That happened more often as we broke out from Normandy and headed for the Seine River. As we advanced, often you could smell what you were coming to a long way before you saw it. Shortly after we landed, it was obviously a paratrooper. Shortly after we landed, I saw a body lying in this little narrow road. I was walking along a hedgerow. It was obviously a paratrooper. And as I approached the body, there seemed to be some movement in his helmet. He still had his helmet on. There was a hole through his helmet, and there were maggots that were working inside his skull. A lot of those guys were sitting ducks. That were a lot of those guys were sitting ducks. I don't know why they couldn't land them. I guess they really had it bad. And the gliders, so many gliders that were wrecked that we found. I don't know why they couldn't land them. I guess they ran into trees or into obstacles in the dark, and they must have had a high mortality among that group. I remember a lot more about the actions after we left Normandy. the road where they were bringing in casualties. It was difficult to really get the big picture. The road where they were bringing in casualties. The road where they were bringing in casualties. You really didn't know whether the enemy was in front of you or behind you or where it was. You really didn't know whether the enemy was in front of you or behind you or where it was. As we advanced, the artillery would lay down a barrage in front of the advancing infantry. And that's about true. The old saying was that artillery conquers and infantry occupies. It's very painful. This is side B. This is side B of the tape on the Normandy campaign. One of the unfortunate things and the saddest I remember from the Normandy campaign, injuries to the civilians, particularly to children. I remember very well a little kid who had been burned by phosphorus. I remember very well. Phosphorus makes really a terrible burn. The surface and burns very deeply. very painful. But the reason the kid was burned, the surface and burns very deeply, it takes forever to heal. But the reason the kid was burned, as we advanced, the artillery would lay down a barrage in front of the advancing infantry. The old saying was that artillery conquers and infantry occupies. And that's about true. And then the infantry would move into the town. Artillery would lay down a heavy barrage first thing in the morning before the infantry took off. Well, the artillery always has to monitor its accuracy. Well, the artillery always has to monitor its accuracy. And if they don't hit it, they'll adjust. And the way they do it is to pick out a landmark in the distance and shoot at it and see if they hit it. And if they don't hit it, they'll adjust their aim for wind or whatever. And then they know that when they start their heavy barrage, and then they know that when they start their heavy barrage, they're going to be able to put the shells where they want them. So what they would use would be a white phosphorus shell, because that made a dense white smoke when it hit. And they'd usually pick out a church steeple, because they could see it from a long distance. So they'd fire in on the church steeple, it would burst and throw up a dense white smoke. Unfortunately, there were usually it would burst and throw up. Unfortunately, there were usually a few civilians here and there in the town. And on one occasion, there was a young boy and burned through his clothes and into his skin. But these things happen from time to time. But these things happen from time to time. He was and had left. There were two little kids and had left some rifle grenades outside this particular building. And one of them blew up, and I don't know whether they killed one of the kids, but it certainly wounded the other two. Lost part of their extremities. They're going to be able to put the shells where they want them. because they could see it from a long distance. So he was, but these things happen from time to time. And the ground would shake. With Patton bringing his armor in, we were going to be able to really move around the German army, perhaps trap them between the American army and the British army. The Germans, of course, had anticipated this, and they got a little nervous about it. The Germans brought out their bombers. The Germans, of course, had anticipated this, and they got a little nervous about it. And I remember the first time that we were attacked on the road. We were going along the roads in the dark one night when suddenly the planes came over and dropped flares and they lit up the area like daylight. And everybody piled out into the ditch along the road. You could hear them come down. You could hear them come down. You could hear them come down. And the ground would shake. And I thought, well, that's a strange, and the ground would shake. As I was lying in the ditch, it was kind of funny when I think about it. My head was shaking. And I thought, well, that's a strange place to be trembling, is my head. And I realized that my helmet was up against the knee of one of the guys that was lying right next to me, and his legs were shaking like a leaf, you know. In the meantime, however, our fortunately, the wave didn't last too long, and we got back into the vehicles and kept on. It was amazing. And you could see tracers going up. It looked like embers from... We got back into the vehicles and kept on. And you could see tracers going up. In the meantime, however, our anti-aircraft really cut loose at these planes. It was amazing. You could see these tracers going all over the sky. You could see these tracers going all over the sky. A gigantic fire. I think the one thing, in retrospect, the one thing that I most dreaded, I think the one thing, in retrospect, the one thing that I most dreaded was these night moves. It at least usually drew, every now and then, the Germans would come over and they'd drop flares, you know. You just feel as though you were standing out there naked. Or that you were standing on the, in the middle of a bullseye. We were right next to one of the trucks that had one of these 4 50 caliber anti-aircraft cannons on them. One of my men in the truck that I was in yelled up at him and he says, "What the hell's the matter with you? Can't you aim that thing any better than that?" We were right next to, he'd been firing his gun and he apparently hadn't hit anything in the dark. After the tanks had come in strength, and we were really moving south, out of Normandy. Um, after the tanks had come in strength, and we were really moving south out of Normandy, waving the flags, you know, and the civilians started to reappear along the roads, waving the flags, you know, and shouting, "Vive la France, vive la Marie." And the civilians are making a big deal out of this. Center of the town there we'd go through little towns, and invariably there'd be a crowd around the center of the town there with a couple of young women with their heads shaved, occasionally with a big Nazi swastika hanging around their necks. Center of the town there with a couple of young women with their heads shaved, occasionally with a big Nazi swastika hanging around their necks. Or that you were standing on. Every now and then, Germans would come over. We'd go through little towns, occasionally with a big. Apparently, these were girls that had been a little too friendly with the German troops. And the civilians are making a big deal out of this.
Alright, I'm gonna take a sip of water. If you've joined us late, we are sampling tonight the Memories of Normandy from Dr. John Kirchner, my wife's grandpa. And yeah, I'm very honored. I sample a lot of different things in my music. Always the spoken word, people talking. That's my passion. But you know, with all the movie dialogue and philosophers and various things I've sampled, what I am most passionate about sampling as far as the spoken word aspect is normal people. And I never got to meet Dr. Kirchner, and he was, but from everything I know, he was far from ordinary. He was an extraordinary man. He died in 2011. Um, but yeah, it does me good to you know, it's a privilege to get to sample him. And war is terrible, and this isn't an attempt to glorify it, but just to commemorate what he went through. I obviously wanted to do this stream yesterday for Veterans Day, but technical issue kept that from happening. But there's nothing I'd rather be doing right now than making music and getting to hear Dr. Kirchner's story. So if I had done it yesterday, I wouldn't be doing it right now. So I'm thankful. I gave a content advisory earlier, and that still stands, as we're talking about war. But unless I'm mistaken, I believe we've gotten through all of the really rough bits, the really gory graphic parts. So still content advisory, but I think the worst is behind us. I have these samples divided into 6 sections, I believe, and we are about to start the final 2 sections to give an idea of how far along we are. You can probably hear my cat scratching in the other room, but I'm going to finish my sip of water here and shut up and let Dr. Kirchner do the talking, and we'll get back to the tunes.
Unsolid.
We had moved into one field. I remember one evening when there was one of these stone houses, mainly destroyed. It had really been shot up, and part of the walls were still standing. And there was an old couple standing outside the house looking at the soldiers going by, and I went over and I talked with them. The old man said, you know, our house was hit. We won't be able to live in it. And we've lost most of our possessions. Our cow was killed. We don't have anything, don't have a bed to sleep in. He really did. He really didn't. He had nothing but the clothes on his back. So he really didn't. He had nothing but the clothes on his back. Some K rations and stuff. So we gave him a couple of blankets. Some K rations and stuff. But there wasn't really much we could do for him. Say, cigarette pour papa. There wasn't really much we could do for him. The little kids would, if the column happened to stop, little kids would come over to your vehicle and say, cigarette pour papa. They were always asking for cigarettes for papa. Or chocolat pour mama. We always had some chocolate in these K rations or C rations, whatever they were. The cigarettes were always for Papa. We'd give them out to the civilians as we went along. The cigarettes were always for Papa. A cigarette pour mon mari. The 79th Division was the first division to cross the Seine River. And we crossed at a place called Mont M-A-N-T-E-S, which is some 40 miles or so north of Paris. I heard a loud roar, and a German fighter plane flew right over top of our truck. And I could see this big iron cross under his wings. He was so low, I think I could have hit him with a stone. We were always getting German fire during the night, mortar fire. He was so low, I think I could have hit him with a stone. And you could hear these things coming in. Just about dawn one morning, when the whole ground started to shake, and an awful roar of noise. And you could hear these things coming in. But it wasn't the Germans at all. But it wasn't the Germans at all. But it wasn't the Germans, but a battery of 8-inch guns, artillery, had moved in behind us and were throwing 8-inch shells over our heads into the German positions up ahead. They said, one of the guys said, a battery of 8-inch guns, artillery, had moved in behind us. This battery was manned by black troops. It was the first black troops I saw. And I said, sure. So they had loaded up this 8-inch gun, and I pulled a lanyard on it. They said, one of the guys says, you want to fire one, Captain? And I said, sure. So they had loaded up this 8-inch gun, and I pulled a lanyard on it, and boy, it made a hell of a racket, you know, when it went off. So, you know, there were parts of bodies. It turned out to be a devastating effect that these big guns had. It had really been a devastating toll that our artillery took. They said, one of the guys says, and along with all the horrors of war, you know, there are always some things that are kind of funny. And along with all the horrors of war, you know, there are always some things that are kind of funny when you look back on it. Invariably, one of the funny things, it was such a, our anti-tank company was commanded by a captain whose name I've forgotten, but he was a Polish guy, and he took great pride in his military prowess. He was such a rip-roaring soldier, and boy, he was going to win the war by himself. And he took great pride in his military prowess. Invariably, at daybreak, there would be some German soldiers that had been surrounded. The funny part was that invariably at daybreak, there would be some German soldiers that had been surrounded. because they could see the ambulance that would come out of the woods with their hands up and give themselves up to my company. Because they could see the ambulances and the Red Crosses and everything. And just across the road, of course, was the anti-tank company. And we took more prisoners than he did. And this really annoyed him. That the medics, as they called us, were taking more German prisoners than his anti-tank company. Well, the Germans, you know, they were no fools. They knew that we were not armed and that they were safer with us.
All right, we have arrived at the final section of samples. I've had a lot of fun doing this tonight, and I um, hope that you've gotten something out of it. Anyone who's listening in, I don't monitor chat or comments or anything while I'm doing this. I want to be in the moment, but if anyone is listening and you have any questions, um, put them down in wherever you're listening to this, watching this, and I will get back to you with answers if I can. Anyway, you can probably hear my cat in the other room. Let's finish this up so I can release her and be chastised. But thanks for listening.
One of the things that disappointed our own regiment, in fact the 79th Division, was the fact that although we had been the first troops across the Seine River, we never got into Paris. And our men really didn't like that because they figured that our unit, our division, should have been the one get the publicity. They got all the pictures taken. I think it was the 4th Division was ordered into Paris and paraded down the Champs-Élysées. And our men really didn't like that because they figured that our unit, our division, should have been the one to get the publicity. And our men really didn't like that because they figured that our unit, our division, should have been the one to get the publicity. And they had every right to, but I didn't resent this at all because the 4th Division had been one of the first ones into Utah Beach in Normandy and had really taken a lot of punishment and had performed very well. And they had every right to take the credit for marching in. And our men really, and they had every, and our men really didn't like that because they figured that our unit, our division, should have been the one to get the publicity. And they had every right to take the credit for marching into Paris and parading down the main street. One of the cities that we took was the city of Reims. We had a few days stop there. We had the great privilege there. It was a center for champagne, of picking up a lot of champagne. One of the cities that we took was the city of Reims. We had the great privilege there. It was a center for champagne, of picking up a lot of champagne. Rene Fortier. Fortier was from Minnesota. I remember my buddy and I, there was no action at the time. There was no action at the time. We were sitting out in a field and we finished off an entire bottle of champagne between the two of us. And we finished off an entire bottle of champagne between the two of us. We were sitting out in the, ever use it, for what it was intended for. I had meantime picked up a pistol that the Germans called a P-38. Ever use it, for what it was intended for. I had gotten it off of a wounded German officer in Normandy. Shooting, anyhow, Fortia and I sat out there in this field, drinking champagne, shooting sea ration cans off the top of a fence. The regiment organized. He says we had invited the regiment organized a dance in town. He says I'll come to. We had invited the local young ladies. He says she was very friendly. He says I'll come to the dance. He says, but I enjoy dancing not for the dance but for the men. She was very frank about this. There was a movie house there that somehow or other was still in operation. There was a young lady sitting in the box office. So I asked her if she would like to come to the dance. And she got very incensed, and she gave me a lecture. And she says, you think you can just come in here and buy French women? Well, don't be so smart. You are very badly mistaken, Monsieur le Capitaine. You are very badly mistaken, Monsieur le Capitaine. I had nothing more in mind than just a social, an evening of socializing with the local girls and having a nice evening. I remember very well a big move we made with the 2nd French Armored Division. These were Africans from Senegal. Many of them, if not most of them, had sort of ritual scars on their face. But these guys were really gun happy. Big raised scars. They were very striking. But these guys were really gun happy. They'd shoot anything in sight. As we were coming up over little rise, I remember it was raining. On one occasion, we were going up through the back country in a convoy. I saw a German body, a German soldier's body in a ditch. So as to put and this driver ahead of me drove his half-track off the road into the ditch, so as to put the vehicle right over this German body. That was kind of disgusting to me. One other incident that I will always remember, I suppose, one other incident that I will always remember, I suppose, was that after we got up to the Rhine River, one night, just after dark, I heard the drone overhead of an approaching flight of bombers. And this was really an unforgettable sight, because even in the dark, but you could also eventually you could see some tracer anti-aircraft fire going up, but you could also see fires starting all over the city. You could just sort of hear occasionally clump, 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 and bombs going in. When the sound of the bombers finally faded out, there were fires all over the whole city. That was really some sight. I'd never seen anything like that.